My family sold my childhood home while I was away and left me homeless. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. I stood on my own front porch, watching a stranger change the locks on my life. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the sky was a brilliant, mocking shade of blue. I had just spent the last 18 months working a grueling contract job repairing underwater communications cables in the freezing depths of the North Sea. All I wanted was to step inside the house my late father had left me, drop my heavy duffel bag on the hardwood floor, and sleep for a solid week. Instead, my key wouldn't even slide into the deadbolt. I jiggled it, thinking the metal was just warped from the cold. Then, the heavy oak door swung open from the inside. A guy in his mid-40s, holding a cordless power drill and wearing a faded baseball cap, stared at me with complete confusion. "Can I help you, buddy?" he asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. I blinked, my exhausted brain struggling to process the scene. "I think there's a misunderstanding," I said, forcing a polite laugh. "This is my house. I just got back from overseas." The man's face dropped, but not with apology, with pity. "No, man," he said softly, leaning against the doorframe. "I just bought this place a month ago, closed on it on the 4th. I looked past his shoulder into the living room. My father's antique grandfather clock was gone. The worn leather sofa where we used to watch Sunday football was gone. The walls had been painted a sterile, lifeless beige. The photographs, the memories, the entire history of my family that had been anchored in this building had simply vanished into thin air. A sickening, dizzying wave of sheer panic crashed into my chest, making it nearly impossible to breathe. I staggered backward down the wooden porch steps, my mind desperately trying to make sense of an impossible reality. Houses don't just sell themselves. There had to be a mistake, a massive banking error, some bizarre legal mix-up. I pulled out my phone with trembling hands and dialed my brother's number for answers. To understand the magnitude of this betrayal, you have to understand what that house meant to me. It wasn't just a piece of real estate. It was the only tangible piece of my father I had left. When Dad passed away from a sudden heart attack 3 years ago, he left the modest 3-bedroom craftsman entirely to me. He knew my older brother, Mark, was notoriously terrible with money. Mark was perpetually drowning in credit card debt, auto loans, and get-rich-quick schemes that always collapsed. Mom, Susan, always enabled Mark, bailing him out time and time again. But Dad wanted the house to be safe, so the deed was solely in my name, completely paid off. When the lucrative North Sea contract was offered to me, I knew it was my chance to build a solid financial foundation for the rest of my life. Before I boarded my flight, I sat down in the kitchen with Mark and Mom. I handed Mark a freshly cut spare key. "Just check the pipes in the winter so they don't freeze," I told them. "Make sure the mail doesn't pile up on the porch." Mom had cried, wrapping her arms around me tightly. "Don't you worry about a thing, Alex," she had promised through her tears. "We will take perfect care of your home." Mark had clapped me hard on the shoulder, giving me his trademark arrogant grin. "We got you, little bro, focus on the job. Make that offshore money." I trusted them unconditionally. Why wouldn't I? They were my blood. I left my entire life boxed up safely in the attic, including my dad's ashes resting peacefully on the living room mantel. I spent 18 months working 18-hour shifts in freezing salt water, sustained only by the thought of coming back to my sanctuary. I never could have imagined the sinister plan they were hatching the moment I drove away. Standing on the sidewalk as the new owner slowly closed my front door, I listened to Mark's phone ring until it hit voicemail. I immediately dialed Mom. She answered on the second ring, sounding utterly annoyed to be bothered. "Alex, I thought your flight wasn't arriving until tomorrow evening," she said. I could hear clinking glasses and jazz music in the background of her call. "Mom, there is a random guy in my house," I stammered, my voice cracking under the weight of the panic. "He says he bought the place. What the hell is going on?" Silence fell over the line. It wasn't a shocked silence. It was the heavy, guilty, suffocating silence of a thief who has finally been caught. "Well," she finally sighed, her voice entirely devoid of any maternal warmth or regret. "We didn't know exactly how to tell you over the phone. Mark ran into some severe financial trouble a few months ago. We needed the money, Alex. Family comes first." My vision literally tunneled. "You sold my house. How is that even physically possible? The deed is exclusively in my name." There was rustling on the phone, and then Mark's voice cut through the speaker, dripping with condescension. Listen, man, we took care of the situation. You're young. You make great money overseas. Don't make a massive deal out of this. My knees felt weak. Where's all my stuff, Mark? Where are Dad's ashes? Mark let out an exasperated groan. We cleared that junk out months ago. Just figure it out, Alex. We're busy right now. Before I could scream, before I could demand to know where I was supposed to sleep that night, the call abruptly disconnected. I stood alone on the pavement, staring at a home that was no longer mine, clutching a phone that felt like a brick. The dial tone echoed in my ear as the reality of my absolute homelessness set in. That first night was an absolute, waking nightmare. I sat parked in my rental Toyota Corolla in the back corner of a dimly lit Walmart parking lot. A cold, relentless rain drummed against the roof of the car, perfectly matching the frantic, irregular beating of my own heart. Everything I owned in the entire world was shoved into a single canvas duffel bag resting in the trunk. The sheer magnitude of the violation was paralyzing. My dad's vintage watch collection, my childhood photo albums, the handwritten letters my grandmother had mailed me. They hadn't just been moved to a storage unit. Mark's casual dismissal confirmed the worst. They had thrown my entire history into a county landfill just because they needed quick cash. I tried desperately to sleep, contorting my tall frame across the driver's seat, but the damp cold seeped deep into my bones. I was a 29-year-old man with a highly specialized career, yet here I was, shivering in the dark, completely destitute. My bank account held a few $1,000s from the tail end of my overseas contract, but I had absolutely no address, no furniture, and nowhere to go. I felt an overwhelming, crushing wave of grief. It wasn't just mourning the physical loss of the real estate. It was the agonizing death of the family I thought I had. They had casually, ruthlessly murdered my past to fund their own selfish present, and they didn't care if I froze to death on the street. Every shadow moving in the parking lot felt like a threat. I had never felt so profoundly, terrifyingly alone in my entire existence on this earth. As morning broke through the rain, my phone buzzed with a message that changed everything. The text message was from Sarah, my fiercely loyal best friend since our college days. Hey, did you land yet? Let me know when you want to grab welcome home beers. I stared at the bright screen, and the dam finally broke. I broke down sobbing in the driver's seat. I called her, barely able to form coherent words through the hyperventilation. Within 20 minutes, her beat-up Subaru was screeching to a halt next to my rental car. She took one horrified look at my pale, tear-stained face, grabbed my duffel bag, and drove me straight to her cramped, one-bedroom apartment across town. She brewed a pot of strong black coffee, forced me to sit on her worn-out velvet sofa, and demanded I explain everything. When I choked out the story about the house and the phone call, her empathy vanished instantly. It was replaced by a terrifying, hyper-focused, productive rage. "Alex, listen to me very closely," she said, pulling out her laptop and slamming it onto the coffee table. "They didn't just sell your house. They committed a massive, coordinated felony. You physically cannot sell a house that isn't legally yours." We huddled together at her tiny kitchen table and navigated the county clerk's confusing online public records database. As we typed, my crushing sadness was evaporating, burning away rapidly. In its place, a cold, hardened fury was taking deep root in my chest. We searched my exact property address. The system loaded for what felt like an eternity. And then, there it was. A deed transfer officially recorded exactly 7 months ago. I stared at the digital document on the screen, my blood turning to absolute ice. Sarah quickly paid the $5 municipal fee with her credit card to download the full, unredacted PDF of the deed transfer. I read the glowing screen, feeling a wave of physical nausea wash over me. The house, my father's sanctuary, had sold for a staggering $420,000. I scrolled down to the bottom of the page. Under the section labeled Grantor, there was a signature in black ink. It was supposed to be mine, but it was a clumsy, looping forgery. It looked exactly like the pathetic way Mark used to forge our mother's signature on his failing high school report cards. But the forged deed wasn't even the most devastating part of the file. Attached directly to the transfer was a secondary legal document, a general power of attorney. The text falsely claimed that I had willingly granted my brother Mark full, unrestricted legal authority to manage, sell, and liquidate my real estate assets while I was stationed overseas. It was a complete and total fabrication. I zoomed in on the bottom corner. The document bore an official notary stamp from a man named Gary Miller, and the date on the stamp was exactly 3 weeks after my flight had left for Europe. They hadn't just panicked over a sudden, unexpected debt. This was a highly premeditated, calculated theft. They had started the paperwork while I was still getting over my jet lag. Sarah slammed her fist hard against the kitchen table, rattling our coffee mugs. Alex, they actively conspired to steal nearly $500,000 from you. I slowly closed the laptop, the sheer audacity of their crime burning itself into my brain. I knew exactly where I had to go to look my brother in the eyes. I knew my mother's pretentious weekend routine perfectly. Every single Sunday, she and Mark enjoyed a lavish brunch at an upscale, exclusive country club bistro downtown. I walked through the mahogany double doors of the restaurant wearing the exact same wrinkled jeans and jacket I'd slept in inside my rental car. The maitre d' tried to stop me, but I shoved past him. I spotted them instantly in a plush, circular leather booth near the window. Mom was sipping a mimosa, her wrist glittering with a thick diamond tennis bracelet I had never seen in my life. Mark was cutting into a steak, a brand new, oversized Rolex gleaming on his arm. They froze like statues when I aggressively approached their table. Alex, Mom gasped, her face draining of all color. What on earth are you doing here? Just checking in, I asked, my voice trembling with an explosive rage. Enjoying the $420,000 appetizers. Mark slowly leaned back against the leather booth, entirely unbothered, and took a casual sip of his drink. Keep your voice down, bro. You're causing a massive scene in a nice place. I slammed the printed packet of the forged deed and fake power of attorney directly onto his porcelain plate, shattering his wine glass. You forged my signature. You stole my home and threw my life in the garbage. Mark actually chuckled, a dark, sinister sound. Prove it, Alex. You left the country, gave me verbal permission to handle your affairs because you were overwhelmed. Good luck finding a single cop who cares about a messy family dispute. Mom wouldn't even make eye contact with me, staring firmly at her lap. I walked out of that restaurant knowing I was about to burn my family to ashes. First thing Monday morning, Sarah marched me directly into the downtown office of Richard Davis, a notoriously ruthless real estate litigation attorney. I laid out the printed county documents on his massive glass desk. Davis adjusted his reading glasses, scrutinized the forged power of attorney for several minutes, and didn't smile once. This is incredibly brazen, he muttered, tracing the fake signature with his expensive pen. But your brother isn't entirely wrong. We need concrete proof beyond your word that this is a forgery. We quickly agreed to a strict contingency fee arrangement, meaning he only got paid when I won. Our very first tactical stop was finding the mysterious notary, Gary Miller. Davis utilized a private investigator who successfully tracked Gary down to a failing, dilapidated strip mall insurance agency on the edge of town. We walked in completely unannounced. Davis bypassed the receptionist, walked into Gary's office, and slammed the document onto his desk. Mr. Miller, did you verify the government-issued ID of the man who signed this document in front of you? Gary instantly turned a sickly shade of gray. Under Davis's relentless, terrifying legal questioning, the notary cracked in under 5 minutes flat. He admitted, shaking like a leaf, that Mark had paid him $2,000 in cold, untraceable cash to blindly stamp the document without me being present. Gary was absolutely terrified of facing federal charges and losing his state license. Right then and there, he eagerly agreed to sign a heavily detailed, sworn legal affidavit confessing to his part in the crime. With the notary's confession secured, we just needed to follow the trail of the stolen money. Armed with the sworn affidavit, Davis aggressively filed a petition for pre-suit discovery, subpoenaing the private bank records connected to the title company's massive escrow payout. Exactly 1 week later, we sat silently in his sterile, brightly lit conference room meticulously going through the requested wire transfers. Seeing the raw numbers printed on paper broke something incredibly deep inside my soul. Of the entire $420,000 stolen from the sale of the house, not a single penny had been saved, invested, or put aside. Mark had immediately wired $85,000 to an offshore sports betting platform to clear out his massive, crippling gambling debts. 2 days later, he spent another $90,000 in a single cash transaction on a pristine, matte black Porsche 911. The rest of the funds? Mom had used it as a massive, unrecoverable down payment on a luxury high-rise condominium overlooking the city river. They had completely liquidated my past, destroying my father's lifelong legacy, merely to fund a grotesque, temporary fantasy lifestyle. They hadn't sold the beloved house to survive some tragic emergency. They sold it to live like careless royalty while leaving me to sleep in a rented Toyota. The absolute, unadulterated greed was physically sickening. I thought of my dad working exhausting 60-hour weeks at the factory for decades just to pay off that mortgage for me. The disrespect to his memory was unforgivable. I looked up from the bank statements, but Davis was staring at me with grave concern. Davis slowly folded his hands together, resting them heavily on the mahogany desk. Alex, before we take the next step, you need to deeply understand the reality of what happens next. This isn't just a simple civil lawsuit to casually get your money back. The absolute second we officially file this with the courts, the bank and the title insurance company will involve the state authorities. I frowned, my exhausted brain not fully grasping his warning. Okay, good. Let them. Davis shook his head slowly, his expression grim. No, you aren't hearing me clearly. Forging a property deed and a power of attorney to successfully steal $420,000 constitutes first-degree wire fraud and grand theft. If I pull this trigger, your brother is looking at a mandatory 5 to 10 years in state prison. Your mother will very likely face serious accessory charges and serve time behind bars as well. The air instantly left my lungs. Prison. My 60-year-old mother wearing an orange jumpsuit in a cold jail cell. My older brother wearing heavy metal handcuffs. For all their horrific, unforgivable actions, they were still the biological family I had grown up with. Mom had packed my school lunches every day. Mark had patiently taught me how to ride my first bicycle in the driveway of the house he just stole. Could I really be the one to press the button that sends them to a federal penitentiary? I quietly asked Davis to give me a few days to process the gravity of the situation. I sat on Sarah's couch for 3 days, entirely paralyzed by the massive choice before me. On the fourth agonizing day of my severe indecision, my cell phone buzzed violently on Sarah's coffee table. It was a text message from Mark. I opened it cautiously, praying that maybe, just finally, he was offering a shred of genuine remorse or an apology. Instead, I read a message that made the blood in my veins run instantly cold. Mom says you've been asking around town. Listen to me very carefully, you ungrateful little punk. You back off right now. If you try to sue us or cause trouble, I will personally ruin your pathetic life. I'll call your overseas employer and tell them you're a heavy drug addict. I'll drag your name through the mud online, and I'll make sure you never work a contract in this industry again. You owe us for raising you. Stand down, or else. I read the malicious text 3 separate times to make sure my eyes weren't deceiving me. Any lingering, pathetic affection I held, any deep-seated guilt about sending my family to a cold prison cell, instantly evaporated into the ether. Mark wasn't a troubled brother making a terrible mistake. He was a vicious predator aggressively protecting his stolen loot. I calmly took a digital screenshot of the threatening text, grabbed my heavy winter jacket, and drove straight back to Davis's downtown office. I walked past the receptionist, dropped my phone onto his desk, and looked him dead in the eye. I told the lawyer to file every single document and show them absolutely no mercy whatsoever. Davis smiled a sharp, predatory smile and formulated a brilliant, brutal legal trap. We desperately needed them in a highly controlled environment to serve the lawsuit papers and forcefully prevent them from fleeing the state or hiding their remaining assets. I reluctantly texted Mark, forcing myself to sound utterly defeated and broken. You win, Mark. I really don't want the legal drama or the stress. My lawyer drafted a basic family settlement agreement. I'll legally sign away all my rights to the house if you guys just give me $10,000 cash to get an apartment and get back on my feet. Meet me at Davis's office on Friday at noon to sign. Mark replied almost instantly. Smart choice. Bro, glad you came to your senses. See you there. Friday finally arrived. Sarah sat faithfully next to me in the imposing conference room, her hand resting supportively on my shoulder. At exactly noon, Mark and Mom confidently walked in. Mark had a smug, victorious smirk permanently plastered on his arrogant face. Mom looked incredibly relieved, carrying her ridiculously expensive designer handbag. "Good to see you being reasonable for once, Alex," Mark said condescendingly, sitting down heavily in the plush leather chair. "It's always better to keep these little misunderstandings in the family." Davis quietly walked into the room carrying a thick, heavy stack of manila folders, his face completely unreadable and professional. They had absolutely no idea that the folders on the table contained their permanent destruction. Davis didn't even bother sitting down. He stood tall and slid the first heavy folder directly across the polished mahogany table to Mark. "This is absolutely not a settlement agreement," Davis said, his voice cutting through the room like a jagged ice pick. "This is a comprehensive civil suit for real estate fraud, illegal conversion, and severe emotional distress, officially seeking $1.5 million in total punitive damages." Mark's arrogant smirk vanished instantly, replaced by sheer confusion. "What the hell is this?" he stammered, his eyes darting around the room. Davis silently slid the second thick folder over. "And this is a courtesy copy of the criminal complaint, complete with the subpoenaed bank wire transfers and a sworn, notarized confession from your fake notary, Gary Miller. I personally hand-delivered the original to the district attorney's fraud division at 8 o'clock this morning." Mom let out a horrifying, high-pitched gasp that rattled the windows. "Alex, no?" she shrieked, black mascara tears instantly spilling down her pale face. "You cannot do this to your own family. You aren't my family," I replied, my voice dead calm and entirely hollow. Mark abruptly stood up, his fists clenched tight, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple with explosive rage. "I'll kill you, you little," he roared, lunging forward. Davis calmly tapped the screen of his smartphone. "This entire room is audio recorded, Mark. And there are 2 armed police officers waiting patiently out in the lobby." The blood drained completely from my brother's face as he finally realized he had lost everything. The legal and financial fallout was spectacularly faster and vastly more brutal than I could have ever imagined in my wildest dreams. By the following Monday afternoon, the district attorney had successfully frozen every single one of their bank accounts and placed an immovable legal lien on Mom's luxury riverfront condo. The massive title insurance company, desperate to violently recoup their massive financial loss, eagerly joined our civil lawsuit. When the overwhelming pressure truly hit, their supposed unbreakable family loyalty disintegrated in mere seconds. Mark desperately tried to blame the entire criminal scheme on Mom, legally claiming it was all her devious idea and that she had emotionally manipulated him into it. Mom immediately hired a cheap, sleazy defense attorney and publicly testified that Mark had physically coerced her into participating. They viciously tore each other apart in court like rabid animals caught in a steel trap. Mark was eventually convicted and sentenced to 4 hard years in a state penitentiary for felony wire fraud and forgery. Mom narrowly avoided jail time, but was slammed with 5 years of severe, restrictive probation and lost her luxury condo entirely to the massive civil judgments. They were left completely bankrupt, their social reputations permanently and publicly destroyed. I didn't even bother attending Mark's final sentencing hearing. I had already packed my bags, loaded up my new truck, and was ready to leave that toxic city forever. Walking out of the courthouse for the final time, I finally felt the heavy chains break. It has been exactly 2 years since that horrific nightmare finally ended. Through the title company's mandatory insurance payout and the aggressive court-ordered liquidation of Mark's remaining assets, I received full financial restitution plus significant punitive damages. The money didn't magically bring back my dad's antique grandfather clock or my irreplaceable childhood photos, but it gave me a clean, powerful fresh start. I moved entirely across the country, bought a beautiful, secluded cabin nestled near the mountains, and I am currently engaged to a truly amazing woman. Sarah proudly stood as my best man at our lively engagement party last month. I haven't spoken a single, solitary word to my mother or my brother since that fateful Friday in the lawyer's conference room, and I never will. The most valuable, incredibly painful lesson I learned from all of this is that shared blood is nothing more than a random biological coincidence. True, authentic family are the fiercely loyal people who offer you their couch when you're sleeping in a rainy parking lot, not the greedy monsters who eagerly sell your sanctuary for a sports car. Protect your hard-earned assets. Always trust your initial gut feelings, and never let misplaced guilt keep you tied down to incredibly toxic people. You owe yourself a peaceful, beautiful life free of their poison. I survived the worst betrayal imaginable, and I built a beautiful life from the shattered pieces.